Okay, you guys, episode number 3 of Motorvate, and I'm geeky. I come up with these crazy themes.
I like it.
And well, the theme for season 1, women with drive. Okay, so women that I consider to be at the top of their game, women that I feel broke a lot of boundaries in their career, overcame fear, and overcame a lot of challenges, and hopefully you can give other women, or even anybody listening, men or women, some advice on how to be you ready for this? Leading lady. I'm considering you guys, I'm calling you the leading ladies. And when I say that because I'm geeked out, because I came from a radio background, music radio, not NASCAR radio, but radio. And when I first started walking around in the garage, and you guys can educate me a little bit more too, there weren't a lot of women, especially in the media center, or I don't think there were any on pit road at that time, definitely not in the broadcast booth, radio or TV, but Deb Williams, Lee Spencer. And I thought, man, them girls they're kind of cool. They're like in your face with microphones, and like the drivers are talking to them. Like they're demanding respect from the NASCAR teams and in the garage. So I thought, if I think about it, I consider you guys the leading ladies when it comes to being in the NASCAR garage. So I guess, Deb, you would have been, what year did you, and what made you even get into motorsports?
Okay, well, first of all, my parents were into motorsports.
Okay.
And I mean, Dad was a machinist at the paper mill in Canton, North Carolina for 45 years, loved automobiles. And they were going to races when Mother was pregnant with me. The only place they could get me to quit crying and sleep until I was a year old was in the infield when it was dirt at Asheville, Weaverville, under the loudspeaker. Take me home, I'd cry. Take me to race, I'd sleep. And so when I was about 5 years old, a couple that Mother and Daddy had gone to high school with fielded a car for Ralph Earnhardt. So Ralph's car was at Presley Body Shop at the foot of the Canton Hill. And I was down there one day with Daddy, and he and Frank Presley were talking, and I went over to the car and was on the passenger side and put my hand up on the windowsill and pulled myself up on my tiptoes and looked inside. I was hooked. That was it. You know, it was excitement. I would try to show, my sister's 11 years older than me, and I'd try to show her racing pictures and all, and she wasn't interested. But I was raised that if you don't like something, get up and do something about it. Don't sit around and complain. So when I was growing up, I grew up on the Asheville Citizen newspaper. And I was constantly finding errors in the racing story, statistical errors.
Oh, my God. I love it. Not just grammatical errors, but stats.
It was stats. It wasn't grammar then. It was stats. But so I decided I thought, I know as much about racing as this person does. So when I was 13 years old, I decided I wanted to be a motorsports rider.
At 13?
At 13.
Did you know this?
No.
Yeah. And I was fortunate I had parents who never said, no, you can't do that. It was always, yeah, you can.
Well, I mean, women weren't even allowed in the garage.
Yeah,
so.
but I didn't know that. I mean, we were sitting, I was on the eve of my teenage years, and Daddy and I are sitting on the backstretch at Bristol, and he pointed to Wendell Scott's number 34 car, and he said, okay, watch this. Wendell comes down backstretch pit road. That's when they had the front stretch and backstretch. Comes down the backstretch pit road, stops in his pit, turns the car off, climbs out of the car, works on the car, climbs back in the car, buckles himself back in, goes back into the race. And Daddy turned to me and he said, now see, you can do anything you want to do if you want to do it bad enough. And so I started writing for the Waynesville newspaper when I was a junior in high school. I had a weekly column on what was happening at the high school. And then I started covering high school football and basketball when I was a senior. And it was really comical because I was a majorette in the band. So the band director said, yeah, you're going to get paid for it? And I said, yes, sir. He said, okay, you can do it. So here I'd be in my majorette uniform and wearing a jacket and pants. And I'd run up and down the sidelines because I had to do my own photos too. And I'd run run up and down the sidelines till about 6 minutes left in the second quarter, go out, march a 6-minute halftime show, come back, get my camera, get my pad, go back and finish covering the game. So later on, we had a really good football team that year. We won the state championship. But after high school, I've talked to some of the players, and one of the star players, whose son is actually now the mayor at my hometown, he said, yeah, when we'd be leading 42-0, we'd just stand there and watch you and go, there she goes. There she goes.
she's getting the scoop. So Lee, what about, how did you even get involved in motorsports?
Well, my story's a little bit different because I was a radio and TV brat like you were. My father was on the air the night I was born. And so I've always gone towards the radio and TV side of it. My mother was an exceptional writer. My parents both taught at a broadcasting school. My mother did sales and marketing. You would have probably had a lot in common with her.
Gosh.
So she was at the NBC affiliate in St. Louis. My father was at the NBC affiliate doing announcing, but he was, back then, you didn't go to different markets. You stayed in the market and, worked a variety of jobs. And so when I was 15, the summer, I guess, before my junior year, I started working at the ABC affiliate in St. Louis, and my father was news director, and he would send me out on reporting deals. And so at a very early age, I got a taste of broadcasting and journalism. And so that's kind of how I knew that was the path that I would take. Fast forward to 1992, when we moved to North Carolina, and back then, there were not the professional sports I had grown up with, which baseball, football, hockey, right? The only two games in town were the Hornets and NASCAR.
And NASCAR was big.
And NASCAR was big and taking off and had true superstars at that time. The Dale and Rusty and Dale and I mean, just
and Bobby and Terry.
It was it was just really taking off and becoming more mainstream and growing out of a regional sport to a national sport. And I started working at WFNZ, which was the radio, AM talk sports radio show in town, and actually started producing the morning show with Jim Brinson and Terry Gannon, who had played for NC State. Mm-hmm. And then I started doing news reports because I'd done some of that when I was at school at Southern Methodist University. And, just kind of fell into that. But it kind of, hit a crossroads. The Panthers were coming to town, and it was like, what do you want to do, NFL, or do you want to do NASCAR? And the people in NASCAR were so accessible. That really opened my eyes to, I can go and do football, which I love football. Don't get me, I love all stick and ball. And probably knew less about NASCAR than anything else because growing up in the Midwest, as you know, Angie, we were IndyCar.
Yes.
It was more about IndyCar and dirt racing. It really wasn't the stock car thing.
You knew who Richard Petty and Dale Earnhardt, but other than that, I could not have named a NASCAR driver growing up in Ohio.
Right, but even back in 1992, they were starting to look at the demographics of racing, and 40% of the viewership was female. Well, why was that? Because the drivers, the crew chiefs, they all had big personalities, and so what I lacked in motorsport knowledge, I had the people skills to be able to go up and do the interviews, and then not only that, but start to build trust. And that in this group, because at that time you didn't have educated engineers coming in and working as crew chiefs. These were guys, they had done racing or worked on cars their entire life. It was a different level of trust back then. I know that you had interviewed Kelly Earnhardt, and to get the kind of trust of the people at an RCR or a DEI compared to what you see, like I would say 2311 today, that type of organization where Hendrick now, I mean, all of them, it's just like, PhDs. You interviewed Alba Cologne. I mean, I could not have imagined in 1992. I mean, even when I was in 5th grade and I was the first person done with the math book in my class. And of course, my father had an engineering degree, right? So I had a propensity towards mathematics. I asked for the math book, and my 5th grade teacher said, no, why don't you work on English and social studies?
Because that's what you're supposed to do.
And then a month later, one of the boys he finished the 5th grade math book and she gave him the 6th grade math book. Can you imagine if back in our day we had STEM, that women who maybe had a love for math would have been pushed more in that direction, but I wasn't. So social studies, right? English. And
You're really good at English, though.
Hey.
I mean, you have some great articles out there. And you're very well spoken.
I would say things worked out, right? But it's like, you look at things back then, but, I think even more so NASCAR of the 1990s and Deb knows because she was back in the Tom Higgins days when he was, kind of ruled the roost. Building trust, and Barney Hall. Barney Hall's
Barney
another
Hall.
one. The kind of trust and respect that Tom and Barney had with the people in the garage, that built your reputation more than anything else.
It did. And to kind of add to that, when I first started covering the sport, I was with United Press International. Now, granted, I had covered short track racing and Asheville for the Waynesville paper when I was sports editor there. But when I went to United Press International is when I started covering NASCAR Cup racing. You didn't have the motor coach lots. You didn't have the lounges and the transporters. Where the lounges are today and the transporters is where they haul the engines. And, with me coming in as the UPI person at the track, that helped with the credibility. But what really, really helped with the credibility was the fact that Richard Petty would talk to me in the garage area.
Interesting.
The longtime sports writers who had been there let me sit in on when we were having an impromptu press conference sitting on tires in the garage, with somebody, because you didn't have all the press conferences that
With the
you
pretty
have
banners now. And
my husband tells me, when he worked at the Charlotte Observer back in the 70s, when he graduated, that the interviews were done in the shower. And so I don't know what you did back then to get your
Hey,
interviews.
Deb, we're going a whole new Motorvate today. Let's go, baby.
I walked in on Terry Labonte changing and had the scare of my life. I understand, women go in the locker room sometimes today, but it's like, I can't imagine, back then, I think interviewing at the showers would have been quite the, education.
Well, it was really interesting because what I was going to say was, in fact, Richard Petty would talk to me in the garage. It was like, oh, well, if Richard will talk to her, then she must be okay. And if these older guys are letting her hang around, and do interviews, then, well, okay. And then what made the wives and the girlfriends feel comfortable with me was the fact that Linda Petty was president of the Winston Cup Racing Wives Auxiliary at the time.
Okay.
They always had a fashion show at Burdine's at the Volusia Mall across from the track every February. So I went over there one time when I was down there for UPI, my first Speed Weeks in 1984.
I was going to ask you what year. I was wondering. 1984.
1984. And, this was after I had gone to Darlington for the first time in 1980 and picked up my press credential, and printed on my press credential was no women allowed in pits.
That's what, okay. Because I was thinking you were not allowed in the pit. So how did you do your job?
It was because I was with United Press International, and that had a lot to do with it.
That had to feel weird, though. Were you the only woman in the pits?
Well, I didn't really paying attention to it.
You just do it because you were doing your job.
I was doing my job. And
going after what you wanted.
Yeah. And, I was fortunate in that my dad had trained me, toughened me up.
Mm-hmm.
I'll put it that way. He had toughened me up in my late teens and early 20s. And he said, now, you can't play the female card. He said, if you want to be treated equal, then you got to accept everything. And he said, because men don't like it. When you say, oh, I want to be treated equal, and then you come, I can't do that because I'm a woman.
Mm-hmm.
He says, that doesn't work. He said, you can't do that. And so he had toughened me up and got me in that direction. And I always tell people I was a reporter first. When I was on the job, I was a reporter first and a woman second. When I'm off duty, I'm a woman first and a reporter second. But it can flip at any minute, depending on if I hear a story. But
I love it.
But, I was fortunate. What I was going to say about the Linda Petty, I was a Richard Petty fan growing up.
Mm-hmm.
So I had always called her, sent letters and stuff. And Linda had read one of my letters, and I was talking about how Richard helped me through difficult times in high school and all. And she sent me a high school graduation present.
Oh, wow.
So when I was there in '84 and she was president of the Wives Auxiliary, and I went over to where they were practicing for the fashion show. And I went over there to interview Dick Brooks's wife at the time, Stephanie. And when I was there, Linda goes, "Oh, I've known Debbie since she was just this high." And that immediately gave the wives a comfort level. If Linda says she's okay, she's okay.
She's okay.
And so that helped. And I knew where I had made my mistakes doing the court and law enforcement beat for the Waynesville paper and being a sports editor. So I knew the mistakes I had made there. I knew not to make them. I would go in the garage area if I needed to interview somebody. If I didn't need to interview somebody, I didn't go in the garage area.
Mm-hmm.
And so you built the trust, but it's like Lee was talking about, building the trust and the credibility is the key thing. Because if you didn't have that back then and you didn't build those relations, there were no PR people, then you didn't get the interviews.
And you had to be confident enough to go up to you were talking about the characters. I mean, Dale Earnhardt and Rusty Wallace could have been intimidating in those days to talk to as a, going up to them and trying to get the scoop, right? And then if you had to ask him the tough question, what happened out there? Because you screwed up.
Yeah, I can remember the first time I went to interview Rusty. It was at a test at Charlotte right here, and it was the first time I had gone out. And I was still with WFNZ at the time, and they, gave me a recorder. I went to interview him, and he says, "Why don't we go up in the cab of my truck? It'll be more quiet there." And all the guys, I could see by the look of the guys that it was like, "Oh yeah. He's found a new one. He's testing the new girl out," and it's like. No, and I put my hands up on the dashboard so they could see I am not that type of reporter.
Yes.
And it's like, I had to get the point across right away, and I got my interview, and I went back to the station and went back to work. But it's like, you're absolutely right. They were, and I think it was even more intimidating. I don't know if it's because of my age, but I was over 30 when I got to the garage. So, and I had 2 kids at home, so I was a mom. Being a mother gave me great empathy, because it's like you see the challenges that your children go through. And the older my children got, the more I'm able to relate. And I think I become even more empathetic when somebody has a bad day. But you talk about intimidating, you're dealing with the intimidator. And I can remember, there were times when some of the more established journalists would have the new girl go ask the question, because it's like, it was like, "Go ahead, you ask the question."
Like, haha, let's go watch.
Like,
let's be entertained.
Yeah, exactly. Because they wanted to see, and I can remember Chevrolet was changing models one year, Monte Carlo to Lumina, I think it was, and go ask Dale. So I go up and ask Dale. And he grabbed my hand and he starts walking me through the garage, waving my hand back and forth like this and just smiling and won't give me an answer. I'm like, this is great. But it's those little lessons, kind of live and learn. But I will also say, and, having you interviewed Kelly, I think that the girl dads out there make better men to deal with, because they are a father to a daughter, or they had respect for the mother. And the one thing about Dale Earnhardt was always extremely respectful of women, because Martha, raised him after Ralph died. He was always really close to his sisters. He saw Kelly and wanted to make sure she had an even shot. So I think that, the girl dads really have been the key to just finding equity within the garage, or helping to build equity in the garage.
It's funny because you guys talk about earning trust and the relationships and stuff, because I came into NASCAR totally by accident. I was in radio and CBS, and I got forced to go manage a NASCAR event. Now, at the time, I thought I was, a sales dog, and my boss, who had taught me promotions and events, said, "I need you to work this event." I'm like, "Oh, no. And a NASCAR event? Absolutely not." He's like, "Listen, there's nobody here. You're not too big on your britches. You can still do these events for me. Go run this NASCAR event." So I'm like, okay, fine. Dave, his name is Dave Robbins, mentor in radio, this is one of my favorite humans ever. And so I said, okay, fine, I'll do it. But then I had a sales angle. I'm like, "Is there some NASCAR driver that's doing an appearance?" And they said, "Yes." And I've said, "Well, then It needs to be at Reichert Ford because I'm trying to get an annual buy from Reichert Ford, and I need to, I want all the fans to come there. He goes, fine. So I have no idea. You guys, I'm embarrassed to even admit that I was not prepared for this NASCAR event. It was, remember Bruce Patrum?
Yes.
It was a Bruce Patrum event.
Yeah.
So the station had hired Bruce Patrum to bring in these drivers. I didn't take the time to read about who they were. Because I didn't care, because I was mad about being there, quite frankly. And so all I know is here walks up the driver, the PR guy. It was Sterling Marlin and John Sands. And John Sands comes up to me, and John goes, where's the appearance? And I said, right here. He goes, well, this is a Ford dealership. And I said, so? He was like, well, my driver is Chevrolet. And he's trying to act like it's a big deal, like I should know who this driver is. And I was like, are you the driver? And he was like, yes, ma'am. And I had cash in my pocket. And I go, do you want this? And he said, yeah. I said, well, then sit your blank down and start signing some autographs.
Wow.
And he went, yes, ma'am. Sat down. And then John comes and he's like, I'm going to get fired. And I'm like, listen, this is before social media. Of course, if it was in social media, everybody would have known, but nobody really knew, and the fans were excited. They didn't care. But I did have enough sense to call my brother-in-law, and I say, I don't know what the hell I'm doing right now. Please come help me. And he came, and then after that, I got invited to. John said, you should come to a race and learn more about our sport. And I'm like, I'm a Buckeye fan. They invited me to Michigan. I go, I'm a Buckeye. I'm not going to Michigan. Yeah. And my brother-in-law was like, yeah, you are, because I'm coming with you because I just helped you. I'm like, okay, fine. And I will say, when I walked in the garage, I felt that the people were so nice. And I've been working with rock bands and crazy. And I was never fazed. My nickname was the Rider Bitch because I would tell these rock stars off. Like, I'm not getting all that stuff for you. Do your job, whatever. But when I walked in the NASCAR garage, I just felt like I was at home. It was like, these are my people. I like these. I like these people. And I want to learn more about it. And as I learned more about it, this was in 97. So NASCAR was not on FM dial. But when you came down to Charlotte, they were. And we were giving away spots on country music radio. And I'm like, we could have NASCAR and charge like real money for spots on Sunday. So it was all money driven, but I did fall in love with the sport. and I started to learn about the sport. But it's kind of crazy because as I was negotiating contracts for CBS radio to put it on in the Midwest, in Ohio and Michigan and all these different states in the area, that's when I met my husband, Mike. So my credibility went around the tube really quick because everybody was like, oh, she's after a driver. I'm like, well, no, I did happen to meet a driver. And, Richard Childress is the one that was kind of pushing the whole introduction type deal. But so for me, I felt like it took a while for me to gain the trust of definitely the wives when you were saying in the garage. The drivers were pretty easy because they were nice. They were friendly, but still they probably looked at me. I felt like I had to really prove that I still wanted to work. I didn't want to be a driver's wife sitting on Lake Norman, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So it was very hard for me to. So when you talked about the fashion show, I still have PTSD from that because they were not nice to me that first year when I was dating Mike at all. In fact, Dale Jarrett and Mike were advocates. They're like, we're not going if she can't ride. They weren't going to let me ride in the limo with them to the event.
Goodness.
And I was not allowed to be in the show because I was a girlfriend. I'm like, well, I don't care about being in the show, but Lowe's had bought a table and that was Mike's sponsor. So they wanted me to sit, and Larry McReynolds' wife, Linda, and I were friends, and she was like, please come because I want you to support this event. And I'm like, Linda, it is so intimidating I know that what they're thinking about me. So I think it's like, even though I did this to myself, I ended up marrying a NASCAR driver and then trying to prove that I was a professional. It was hard to gain. And I felt like it would be hard to even gain respect with you guys when I decided like, hey, guess what? I used to do radio. Now I want to jump on Sirius radio. And I bet you guys were going, oh my God, a driver's wife? Are you kidding me? So
No, I know your background.
Okay, good. Well, I learned about NASCAR by reading a lot of your materials.
Oh, well, thank you.
And that's no joke because I was like, okay, listen, I need to read something written by another female to understand this.
Well, you were talking about, Lee was talking about the intimidation and you were talking about it. What was hard for me was having to turn around and interview drivers that I had grown up admiring as a fan. Having to ask Cale Yarborough and Bobby Allison and Richard Petty and David Pearson, those people, questions when they weren't used to female reporters. But when Rusty and Dale Earnhardt and all that group, Bill Elliott and Alan Kwiatkowski, we were all so much the same age that I looked at them as brothers. So I didn't have a problem interviewing them, but it was the drivers that I had watched in my growing up years that now the tables were turned and I had to ask them the hard questions. That's what was difficult for me. But now all these drivers are so young, and it's like, well, I covered your dad. I covered your granddad. It's like, what do you mean you're not talking to me?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I've got to, and you're a peer of mine on Sirius XM radio. I have to really study to figure out who drivers are. And I think, and I don't want to say anything bad, but it's like there aren't a lot of characters. So I have to really concentrate and figure out how can I remember who this kid is and what he looks like. Because I know the names and the numbers, but I'm having a hard time putting the faces with them.
Well, the numbers are the easy part. The paint schemes. I mean, when we got in this, the paint scheme was the paint scheme for 38 weeks.
Yeah.
And so that was simple. And now, you're in the media center. And unfortunately, because, when I was writing or doing things on the side, being a post-race pit reporter, it's different because you cannot leave the media center. And so to have to rely on a little monitor and the paint schemes change, you better be zeroed in on that number because you don't know what driver is half the time because these paint schemes have changed dramatically. But you're absolutely right. Following the grandfather, the father, the son, the grandson, I mean, it's like generations of racing. And so as Deb knows, once you've built a relationship with the patriarch of that family, it certainly simplifies,
It's true.
having those relationships with the younger generations and knowing what to talk about, knowing what their loves are, what their interests are, and trying to get them to peel back the layers. One of the hardest people and we have this discussion amongst my peers quite often, we're trying to peel back the layers on is Ty Gibbs, who grew up in the sport, but due to tragedy in the family, it's taken longer than I think we've all anticipated to kind of peel back the layers on him and get to what motivates him, outside of racing. But it's complicated at times. It's hard at times to ask drivers who have finished second, third, fourth, and beyond, because if you're not the winner, you're the loser. And, if you're covering stick and ball, there's always a winner and a loser, and you know what you're going to get. And there are plenty of winning interviews and plenty of losers. We got one winner and 35, plus losing interviews, and they want to get the hell out of there. And that's one of the challenges we face on a weekly basis.
And, one thing that was hard for me when we were talking about building the relationships, when I first started covering the sport, like I said, the only driver that had any PR person was Richard Petty. And you had to build the relationships with the drivers. Now, the manufacturers had PR reps, but that was it. And what was really difficult for me was as teams and each driver started getting their public relations representative, was not being able to just go up to a driver any time and saying, can you, give me a few minutes. What helped me understand that was when I left Scene and went to work for Penske as the director of public and community relations for Penske Racing South.
I forgot that you did that.
And suddenly I saw these drivers' schedules and it was like, oh my gosh.
Now I get it.
Yeah. And the first PR meeting, NASCAR would have all the PR people come together and meet in Daytona before Speed Weeks. First thing I did in that meeting was stand up and apologize to all of them for not scheduling interviews. And that helped me understand how to work within the system that had now developed in the sport. But until I went to work for Penske Racing and then worked for what's now the Cars Tour as the PR, it was Pro Cup then, and then worked for handling PR at North Wilkesboro when it reopened briefly and running the media center at Rockingham. I call that decade my education in motorsports because up until that time, I had been only a reporter. That's all I had ever been. And when Bill French Jr. was really angry at me one time, he had already expressed his displeasure from the walking out of the press box at Michigan all the way down the steps, through the tunnel, and up till we parted. And he went to the garage and I went to the media center. I listened. And when we were at Darlington next week at the National Motorsports Press Association Hall of Fame dinner, I went up to Bill French Jr. and I told him, I said, I really appreciate you telling me how you felt. He said, well, I'll tell you one thing. If I've got something to say to you, I'm not sending a messenger. I will tell you myself. And he said, you remember one thing, we all eat out of the same pot. I did not understand that until I worked for a team, I worked for a track, and I worked for a series. And that education that I received in that time frame really gave me a much better understanding of motorsports, the motorsports industry, and made me see stories that I hadn't seen before. And it also made me realize that I was really off base on some things I had written.
Well, and it's so crazy because I wanted to ask you guys today what it's like writing with social media, and everybody is trying to be first.
I hate social media.
And I do too. Girl, listen, I wish I keep waiting for the year when the trend is not to be on social media, like when it's cool to not be on social media anymore, because I'm tired and I'm exhausted and I can't learn another social media discipline, and then the algorithms and the whole thing. It makes my head hurt. But it's like everybody is in such a hurry to be first that I feel like there's not a lot of facts, or there's just not a lot of good detailed stories anymore. Does that, I am getting old, okay? I do understand that, but.
No, but you got to look at it this way. If I may say something first. When I was at United Press International and we were going head to head with the Associated Press all the time, our motto was get it first, but get it right. If you don't get it right, there's no sense in having it first. And I think that's what a lot of social media does not have. They're not worried about getting it right. They're worried about getting out there and getting the clicks.
Getting clicks. And
this has turned everybody into journalists.
In their opinion.
Well, in their opinion, right? Yeah.
And Deb, right now, she's president of the NMPA, which is the National Motorsports Press Association. And this is something that, I would, I just want to bring up, because just because you have a camera phone does not make you a journalist. Mm-hmm. And I'll be damned if the 30 years I've invested in this sport to have the relationships with the people and their public relations reps, and to know the history of the sport and the birthdays and anniversaries and reunions I've sacrificed to be here. If I'm going to let you come behind me and put your phone up during my interview and let my life's work go out on your fan page because all of a sudden you have a phone and you have a platform, because you can wait till my interview is over and then you can come back and you can ask your own damn question.
I love it. We got Lee fired up. I love it.
Because, you're right,
though.
This phone does not make you a journalist, and you have not earned the right. And I will go so far to say that if you do not have an outlet that you're working for, you really should be paying a commercial license.
I agree.
For a hard card, just like the photographers have to do.
Well, didn't it used to be? It was hard to get a hard card at one point.
Oh, absolutely. You had to prove had to prove that you deserved to be there. That's not the case.
And it's so. And I was wondering how they get in the media center. There were times. Listen, I've had people when I started working for Sirius XM ask me why I was in the media center, and I'm like, well, I'm trying to just do a job here. But
well, you have a radio background,
yes,
right?
Yeah,
exactly.
But people didn't know that, and what you just said really clicked in my head, and I hope people that are listening understand that this is not Lee being catty. This is Lee saying, I have put all this time and effort into this, and I'm asking the right questions. Mm-hmm. I'm trained. I'm asking the right questions because I have experience and I've learned from my mistakes, and you need to do the same thing.
Right.
Learn, and don't just.
Because to me, that's like plagiarism. That's like,
it is.
If I went into Deb's story and, took off paragraphs of or stole the question and the answers to that. One of the things that really gets me is when somebody said, well, I just assumed it was in a scrum. No, it was a one-on-one interview.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That's no excuse. You can't assume anything. And that's probably my biggest pet peeve right now is from where we were when I got here. And mind you, let's go back to our radio backgrounds for a second, because when I, was 30 plus years old and starting out in Charlotte, and I did work for a radio station. I produced the morning show, which was the top sports show in Charlotte. I could not get credentialed to North Wilkesboro. I could not get credentialed to Daytona as a radio person.
That's right.
With a paying job and insurance. It's like, listen, I was legit. It wasn't a self-made website that you just decided.
Exactly.
Right.
But that's how stringent.
It was hard.
You could not, they just wouldn't let anybody in. And
What year would you say that started kind of getting loosey-goosey?
When it was social media started.
Yeah.
When the citizen journalist started.
Citizen journalist, there you go. Yeah.
And that's when they started. That was actually, it opened up during the time that I was working for Penske and the Pro Cup Series, which is now Cars Tour and all that. Because when I came back into that with racingtoday.com, I was like, where are these people getting credentialed?
Mm-hmm.
And
why are there so many people in the garage? I'm claustrophobic, so I have I'm going, okay, I don't understand. I mean, my friends, this weekend I'm going to Martinsville only because Mike is coaching a driver in the truck series, and we have friends that actually have a really cool RV spot. I've never done this. It's on top of the track that overlooks.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm like, okay, that is going to be fun
back there
for
where
me.
the railway.
Yeah,
That's cool.
And a couple of friends were like, oh, can you get us a hot pass in? And I'm like, there's no need to be in the garage, you guys. Like, we're going to be in the best spot. Most fans would pay a lot of money to be where you're going to be this week. No, I'm not going to get you a hot pass. Now, I'll go in there and get a hot dog because I have to have a hot dog. That's the only reason why I'm going to walk in the garage. And if I can convince my husband to do that for me, I won't even set foot in the garage because I don't have a purpose to be there.
There is
this weekend.
There is a time and a place that you can't bring people just to give them an idea, just to give them a taste. But, especially this time of the year where there's so much on the line, and you are going to see the intensity ratchet up during the playoffs, then you have got to kind of throttle back and pick your places. When people say to me, hey, can we go to a race with you? We'd love to see what you do. The first 25 races, maybe the first 24.
But not when it's getting down to the wire.
But when it gets down to the nitty gritty, this is how I do garage tours, and I love giving garage tours.
I do too. I do too.
Because you get to see it through their eyes, and you remember why you want to make NASCAR seem like the most fabulous sport in the world, because seeing it through their eyes the first time kind of renews why you're here in the first place, right? But you also have to know when to bring the people in. The first thing I say to my groups are, I want you to have respect for the people that are in here, because if I brought 20 people into your office while you were trying to do your job and you had a 5:00 deadline, how would you feel? And usually the little light bulb goes on, they get it, and we go on from there. And
my big thing is, please pay attention, because you're not going to hear the race car around you, and they are not. You need to get out of their way.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
True.
You need to get out of their way. But I have to pay Lee a big compliment, because earlier this year, Mike and I still do Sirius XM radio, and we were doing a Skinner Roundup, and it was a Sunday show after a Saturday night race. It's very confusing. We're on when there's not a cup race, okay? We got a very weird schedule on Sirius XM. But the thing that was kind of fun for me as a radio host and appreciating a true journalist getting sound for me the night before, because we're trying to recap the race. Now, we watched it on TV, but we were not in the garage getting all the sound bites, right? And getting the real scoop of what happened to a specific team or specific driver. And my producer was like, hey, Lee was in the garage for us. And I was like, oh, Lee Spencer? And he's like, yeah. I was like, yes. I was like, I'm going to actually be doing, I'm like going to be like a legit show today. Like, this is cool as hell. And I remember even Mike was like, damn, those were good sound bites. I'm like, yeah, because it was Lee.
Yeah.
You know? And I think I even texted you. I was like, thank you so much. I felt like I had like the coolest show today because I had legit inside scoop sound for the listeners on the channel.
It makes all the difference in the world.
Oh my gosh.
It does. And while you're talking about radio and TV, the year that they started the TV show Inside NASCAR, I worked as a reporter and researcher and writer on that show.
I used to love that show.
And that really gave me insight into how difficult radio and TV is, because, you know, when you're interviewing a driver for a print story, you don't necessarily have to make sure it's phrased quite right, that you can follow up and everything. But man, when you're standing there and you're with a microphone, and back then, and that's another change I've noticed, the drivers back then were very uncomfortable with microphones. Mm-hmm. And they were so uncomfortable with seeing tape recorders that I would actually put my tape recorder underneath my notepad. So to make them
That's
more
some old
relaxed.
school stuff, kids. Notepads, pens.
But you know, Humpy Wheeler was the one that advised me to go on and work with Sunbelt Video on that TV show Inside NASCAR, because he said, if you'll do that, you'll be more valuable in the job market, because you will be among 20% of the journalists in this nation who have worked for a newspaper, a wire service, and TV. And learning that if you write a script for TV and you've got to have the video to match it. Now, it really helped me with my feature writing, but that gave me a whole new respect and insight into a side of the business that I had briefly had courses in college, but never worked in. So, yeah, it's a whole different world when you're doing radio and TV.
Just finding the right B-roll for the right...
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I can remember I worked at Sunbelt when we first moved here. In addition to producing morning radio, I also worked at Sunbelt putting together video packages for corporate, which was interesting because it was more on what you're used to is the marketing side of it. And I can remember doing something for Slim Jim one year with Terry and Bobby, and it was a promotion that they were doing and sending if you won, you got to come to a race. You know, fans got to come to a race, and we actually had to set up all the filming for that at Richmond when a hurricane came through. So we had to go out. I mean, and you talk about being put to the task. I mean, this is kind of where you're, you know, being a Boy Scout and being prepared, kind of, because I was in Explorers after I got kicked out of Girl Scouts. But
that does not surprise me.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you know, when you set a national forest on fire. But anyway.
At least you can start a fire.
Yeah. Well, you know, there's that. That's another story. But, you know, being prepared because, you know, you had to get a generator. There's no electricity. But in addition to that, you know, because the cameras were low and the camera guy didn't check the audio, you know, you're running audio on what used to be, I don't know, I'm trying to remember what they were called. They were the big tape recorders that were about like
Was it the cart? Like the 8-track cart deal?
Yeah, you kind of not the cart, but these were tape recorders you'd bring with you, and they had those little diskettes but this was, you know, the fact that you're running audio at the same time as you're running video, then if your video does not have the audio, you got a backup plan. But I mean, you know, it's funny you bring up Sunbelt because, you know, Sunbelt today, I mean, Deb and I were at NASCAR Productions this morning, and it's like you look at where Sunbelt was, and now you look at NASCAR Productions, and it just shows you the depth of how big this whole thing has become. Yeah. And it's fascinating from every aspect. And with her, you know, background working in so many different elements of it, I mean, I've never done, well, I did the NASCAR Wire the first year because I was still with Sporting News, but you know, the kind of pressure that she was under at UPI or somebody who worked for AP, but, you know, to see every level of the sport and covering it from a journalistic and even beyond that, you know, doing the marketing, doing public relations, which we've probably all done at one point
we've
or
all had
another.
to.
Yeah.
You know, you just do whatever is necessary at the time, but it also makes you more well-rounded to do the job that you're doing now.
So
Exactly.
I'm glad that you said that, because one of the messages I'm trying to put out, and this is like, it's a little bit of motorsports, but I have a client that has a marketing manager right now. She's great. She's young. And they're like, we want, you to mentor her. I'm like, well, I can't mentor somebody if they don't want to listen.
Yeah, that's
You know what I
true.
mean? So that, and hopefully she will, but I am direct and to the point, because I got too many things going on. So I can't sugarcoat things. And I know sometimes and people are like, well, that's very
We're all that
intimidating.
way.
Well, that's why
We were having that conversation. Yeah.
And but the thing is, it's like when they look at you and they're like, oh, well, it's 6 o'clock. And I'm like, so I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, or I'll call somebody on a Saturday. Well, it's Saturday. And I'm like, so listen, I'm used to motorsports world. You're Monday through Sunday. You never know when you're going to get the phone call or what's going to happen. And I mean,
you're used to 12 and 14-hour days.
Yes, exactly. But the people today don't like that. They don't. I mean,
they don't.
People are being told they have to show back up in the offices right now, and they're having meltdowns over that. And I'm like going, oh my gosh, we're getting so weak and wimpy. And like it really touched a nerve when you said, like, do your own homework.
Yeah.
Do your own interview.
Exactly.
Don't feed off mine. And it's like, how can we train the journalists of tomorrow or the PR and explain to them that you might have to do something that's outside of, like, how I got involved with NASCAR is because I had to go work an event that I thought I was too good to do at first. I did.
That's kind of my advice to someone who wants to do what we do is don't be afraid to take a job that gets your foot in the door and then make the most of that opportunity.
Exactly.
And make the connections with people. Dress to impress, but and you always hear dress for the job you want, not the job you have. But because I had to tell this kid at Media Day at Daytona that you need to have a little better hygiene before you come in a scrum. If you don't know that already, by the time you're covering a scrum, I mean, it's like that stuff. It just it's kind of beyond me.
It's the common sense approach. I feel like we've lost a little bit of common sense and respect.
Well, I wasn't too respectful because the message had to be delivered and nobody really had the cojones to do that. So Mama Lee's going to step up.
I love it.
I must not have been in that scrum.
Thank God for you, honey. But, it's like, don't think any job is beneath you because you don't know what that next job will lead to.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like your mentor and boss said to you, go do this. Mm-hmm. And you found something you fell in love with, and it's driven your passion for how many years now?
We have 26, 27 years, and
see?
I found my hubby.
Hey.
And he ain't too bad, so.
Well, I keep having people say, well, when are you going to retire? When are you going to retire? I even had my chiropractor ask me that the other day. When are you going to retire? When are you going to stop doing this? I said, when it's not fun anymore.
Mm-hmm.
As long as I'm enjoying it and it's fun, why should I stop?
It's
all
funny.
I've ever wanted to do.
It's so funny that you said that because I was sitting here thinking, I'm like, okay, I'm going to get throat punched from both sides if I ask this, but I'm really doing it selfishly, kind of for me. It's like, when do you age out of the sport? Do you age out of the sport? Because drivers do, right? But then I'm thinking, well, I'm still having fun. I want to start. I'm 52. I'm starting a podcast at 52, right?
So, you're young,
and I still want to write books. I mean, there's things that I still want to do. But then I think, do people look at us in the garage of like going, oh God, they're still hanging on to and I'm thinking, but I still love it.
No, they don't. I think they would if we were in a crew chief position or driver position or something like that. But to be in the job, the area that we're in, no, I don't think that even crosses their mind. And when people ask me how old I am, I just say old enough to know better and too young to care.
I like that.
It's not like working for a certain network where they have to find creative ways to lie to you, right? I mean,
That's true.
There was radio. I was talking to a guy that was a fueler the other day on Tyler Reddick's team. And I said, you found a job that gave you longevity. It's kind of like radio, right?
Valid point. I like where you're going with this.
Knowledge is power, right?
Oh, yeah.
And the fact that I guarantee you that anybody going down to that infield care center short of Bob Pockris, they're not going to be able to catch up with me if I'm running down there.
That's true.
And I hate that I passed up on the gym to have to go to the production center this morning, but I will go back this afternoon. And it's a matter of taking care of yourself, taking care of your body, taking care of your mind. You got to have the mental health, because this is not an easy gig. Yeah. And it's, as you said, your phone could ring Monday through Sunday. It can ring at midnight. I think the calls that I hate getting the most is if something, there's been an accident or something, because usually those come at 11 o'clock at night, and that's not when I do my best work. So, but you do have to step up.
I remember there was a car owner, and Deb, you'll laugh about this, and Lee's going to ask me afterwards, who was the car owner? Because I'm going to go throat punch them. But it was so funny. I remember you walked by, and they said, "Oh, don't tell Lee anything because she'll report it." I'm like, well, isn't that her job? Isn't that her job? And I was like, that's what she's supposed
That's what she gets paid to do.
That's right.
And but it was like, but I think what he was trying to more say is like, she has a very good way of pulling out of you something that is maybe you don't want told yet, and so be careful, because she's very good at her job, basically. And so it was actually a compliment. And I said, well, she's just very tenacious. If she doesn't get the answer she wants, she's going to keep. That's what a reporter's job is to do.
Yeah,
right?
And it's interesting because I've actually had some wives. I had one wife say, "You know why they don't call you necessarily the way they do so and so and so and so?" And I said, "No, why?" And they said, "Because they know they can't manipulate you. They know that you're going to pick up the phone and call somebody else to verify it or question about it. They call the people that they know's not going to do that, and they can feed them what they want to." And two things, I was fortunate. I had a lot of people take me under their wing and guide me and coach me and
too.
explain, where women have made mistakes before and all. And one veteran motorsports rider who'd been covering the sport for about 20 years when I came in, and he told me, he said, as a reporter, there are two sides to every story. But you have to remember, in racing, there are 4 to 5 sides to every story.
Or more.
Yeah, and he said, they don't tell you things because they like you. They tell you things because they have an ulterior motive. And he said, they use us just like we use them. And he said, you've always got to make the call, and because it's either a driver that's trying to get rid of a crew chief trying to get rid of a driver, a team driver trying to get rid of a driver. Yeah, exactly, and play mental games and all. So he said, you got to do that. And the other thing, to what Lee was talking about as far as asking the questions and running to the infield care center and all, he told me when I first started, he said, you are working harder right now than you really need to, because you don't know who's going to give you the good answers. And he said, after you've been working in this sport for a while, you know who's going to give you the best quotes, and you're not spinning your wheels. He said, right now you're wasting time. You're spinning your wheels because you don't know who's going to give you those good answers. You don't know who's going to give you the good quotes. But the longer you cover this sport, the more you're going to learn that, and you work more efficiently because you know who to go to.
I love that. So I'm doing my my final wrap up here, and I get to hit you guys up with a very geeky little bit here, but I think it's going to be a fun bit where you can give some advice or reflect, whichever you choose. We'll start with Deb. Looking in the rear view mirror, what if there was one instant that you could have changed, or maybe something that you learned from that you would want to motivate others from an experience? And Lee, you're going to have the same question, so you get a little more time to think about it.
Well, actually, it was something I learned when I was covering high school football. And it's proved extremely beneficial in covering racing. And that is, if you feel you got shortchanged or you felt like you got, well, basically screwed
Yeah.
because the person didn't give you the interview, don't lose your temper and chew them out first. Be polite. Ask all the questions you need to ask. Leave the toughest one for the last one because you don't want to make them mad at the very beginning.
I like that.
It's like foreplay.
Yeah, exactly. And
it takes a woman to know that, everyone, just FYI.
And then if you're, you want them to you want to let them know, look, don't ever treat me that way again. Do it after you've done your interview. Get the interview first. I messed up with a high school football coach one time who had told me he was going to give me the story first, and it went to the Asheville Citizen first, and my managing editor came in and threw the paper on the desk and said, I thought you said he was going to talk to you first.
Oof.
And so I lost my temper, and I called the coach, and he hung up on me. And I thought, oh, my gosh, how am I going to get this story now? So I went to the high school and walked the track. I don't know how many times I walked that track. And that was the biggest lesson I learned was get the story first, then lose your temper. Don't lose your temper first.
I'm writing this down because I could learn from that on a day-to-day basis, just for life in general, right?
Mm-hmm.
Lee?
Well, I go back to COVID, and after doing this, for many years, right? I think my first year, I did a show with Doug Rice in 93, 94-ish. And so it's been a while. But during COVID, I realized that I didn't know my neighbors. I didn't have a lot of women friends because I didn't have time. I was on this hamster wheel called NASCAR for so many years. And during COVID, I invested the time to get back into the book club that I had been a member of, to be more outgoing to the women in my surrounding area, to my neighbors, and just build more of a female friend base outside of the sport to keep me grounded, because life goes by so quickly, and all if you've lost somebody or lost, friends, family, whatever, you realize that those are relationships you'll never get back. So, I have found that, since 2020, I've worked really hard to regain a life outside the sport.
That's Kelly Earnhardt Miller said, be present, like take in things when they actually happen. But it's funny because when you were saying that, I thought, wow, I did not become more present or engaged with girlfriends until Mike kind of retired, and we went up to the mountains and started meeting new people. And then I started getting back with my high school friends and my college friends, and I'm so happy that I did that. But
your life's fuller.
It's much fuller, definitely much. And I still love motorsports.
Oh, absolutely.
But it's just not my entire life anymore.
Right.
And I enjoy it, and we still have a lot of fun. During COVID, I just wanted to let you know I did get better at golf. I could actually probably play with you. But I haven't played since COVID, so now I'm going, okay.
Could have played with us yesterday.
But
maybe down in
to
Daytona.
what Lee said and what you're talking about and what Kelly Earnhardt Miller was talking about, that realization came to me when I backed away from the sport to be my mother's primary caregiver.
Yeah, that
after my dad passed. And, I'm so fortunate that I was able to be there. It was a time when my career had slowed down, and now I understand why God had it that way, was so I could be there for both of them. And then after Daddy passed, I became Mother's primary caregiver, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. My sister and brother-in-law paid my bills so I could focus on taking care of Mother, and they wrote it off as paying for her care on their taxes. And that is what brought the realization to me about enjoying the family and taking the time and knowing what's precious and important. Was taking care of Mom for a little more than 3 years.
Things like that will do it. I remember the last conversation I had with my dad, and you guys will appreciate this because you'll know exactly what I was probably experiencing. But we were flying home from someplace out west, and we had stopped for fuel in Texas. And my phone rang, and it was my dad. And my dad was off Appalachia, and he was down in the holler in southern Ohio. And he called and he goes, Ange. And he had a stutter, and he said, when is Mike going to win in that 4-car? Because I'm down here at the swamps, and I said, Daddy's never going to win in the 4-car. It's a turd. And that's the last thing I said to my poor dad, and then he passed away, and I'm like, no. What a terrible thing to, but then I started paying more attention to you never know when those conversations. So being more present, I love that you started getting those relationships. So I don't like to end looking in the rearview mirror. We got to look ahead. Let's say we're all on the lead lap. We're all on our own lead laps right now. The future. What's the future hold for Lee? Or what's something that you're doing right now that you just wanted to kind of brag about or share about? Don't leave SiriusXM, please. I love having you there as a
I'm going back to Australia, New Zealand, and last time I was there, I was covering Kyle Larson running on dirt, and I'm going back to do it again. And so I'm looking forward. He's running high limits there week after Christmas, and I still love dirt racing. It's just Sirius really takes a lot of time and focus, and it's like you said, you have to have preparation, and it's like you said, you started a new career at 52. I started a new career at 62. I mean, not that I haven't done radio, and I've really been a part of Sirius, for many years, but being in this role and starting. You can teach an old dog new tricks.
See, there you go. Motivating all the way.
That's right.
Deb, what's your lead lap?
Well, I've got to finish a book that got kind of put back on hold when I had COVID because it was difficult for me to write after I had COVID. I guess that's because I had a high fever for 36 hours of 104.
Ooh.
But, there's more books that I have that I would like to do, and I want to really share the knowledge that I have gained with the young people coming along now. I'm back teaching Southern Motorsports Communications at Appalachian State University one day a week. And I enjoy working with them and teaching them how to do Zoom conferences, they got a first chance at a press conference and the etiquette they need to do this past Tuesday night, and helping preserve the history because unlike other sports, history is so critical to covering this sport correctly because of the years that people work and the families and the generations that you have. And you have to understand why something is relevant today because of what happened decades ago, And so I think it's a preservation thing there, and preserving the history is important. So those are the things I'm looking at in the future.
I love it. So I'm very proud of myself for naming this episode Leading Ladies, because you definitely both have been leading ladies in press, media, PR when you had to do that, teaching others when you're doing that, and being a president now of the National Motorsports Press Association, going back to Australia, which, by the way, is on my bucket list, so I need your notes on where to go and how to fly there and all that kind of stuff. But
what wine to drink.
Yeah, what wine to drink. Very important for Skinner and I, as you know. I told Skinner, you never know, if you go race there, you might win. Every time he goes out the country, he wins a race. So
there you go.
Find him a race to go to, and we'll maybe join you next year. But thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
For taking the time and helping me out with Motorvate. And that's all the time we have for today's episode of Motorvate. Don't forget to subscribe to however you get your podcast, leave comments, let us know if we're doing good, bad, interviews that you want to hear. But most importantly, just remember to always motivate others.